They look sturdy, but beneath the steel and concrete, history bleeds into the river below. Australia's bridges are more than infrastructure. They are monuments to sudden tragedy, isolation, and violent, unresolved death. Tonight, we dare you to look down as we count the arteries of the damned. Don't blink. This is the top 15 haunted bridges in Australia. 1. Old Victoria Bridge, Picton, New South Wales. The Old Victoria Bridge at Picton is a monument of cold, dark sandstone, stretching its arches over the sluggish waters of Stone Quarry Creek. Opened in 1891, the structure possesses a heavy silence that seems to absorb all ambient sound. When the trains ceased using the line, the bridge became a place defined by mist and isolation, retaining the spectral chill of its Victorian construction. To stand beneath the central span after midnight is to feel the air pressure drop sharply, a physical precursor to the terror reported along its weathered parapet. The darkness clinging to the stone is fueled by tragedy. Local legend centers on a woman, often identified simply as Emily, who met her end here in the early 20th century. While historical records are often vague, the persistent accounts describe a sudden, desperate fall from the high parapet, a fatal impact onto the rocks below, or a purposeful plunge into the murky creek bed. The bridge, it is said, never released her spirit. Instead, Emily became intrinsically linked to the stone, a fixed point of immense emotional distress, particularly when high fog settles in the valley, obscuring the structure's deep drop. Investigators consistently log extreme thermal anomalies directly above the fourth arch, contradicting natural airflow patterns. These cold spots are frequently accompanied by residual sound phenomena. Visitors report distinct, high-pitched moans that abruptly terminate, sounding less like an echo and more like a final, drawn breath. Witnesses describe the manifestation as a pale, blurred figure briefly silhouetted against the dark masonry. A figure that seems less concerned with the living and more focused on the deep descent. The sightings are sporadic but identical across decades. A fleeting movement, a white shape dissolving into the black water below the bridge's foundation. The structure is not a mere crossing, it is a repository. The massive stonework simply holds the final moment on repeat, played out against the silence of the abandoned railway, even in broad daylight. A palpable sense of dread accompanies the crossing. Emily does not pursue those who visit the bridge. She only ensures that anyone who pauses long enough hears the single, terrifying shriek that the Victoria Bridge refuses to let die. 2. Windsor Bridge, Windsor, New South Wales. The mist rising from the Hawkesbury River clung to the latticework of Windsor Bridge like a shroud. Even by day, the structure felt ancient, bearing the weight of generations of traffic and a deeper, more sinister history hidden beneath the muddy flow. Locals rarely linger on the bridge after twilight, knowing the river crossing is not merely a piece of colonial engineering, but a notorious site of desperation and sudden, unforgiving death. The bridge, inaugurated in 1874, became infamous almost immediately. Before its construction, the river crossing was precarious, prone to flash flooding that dragged away drays and men alike. But the bridge itself offered a grim efficiency for suicide. The most persistent, chilling legend concerns Agnes, a young woman in the late 1800s who, broken by financial ruin and betrayal, threw herself from the center span. Her body was never recovered. Instead, she became permanently entwined with the bridge's very structure. Agnes's spirit is reportedly cold and vindictive. Drivers crossing late at night often report a jarring sensation, a sudden, deep dip in temperature even in summer. Eyewitnesses have described seeing a spectral figure, tall and gaunt in antiquated white, standing silently on the iron railing before dissolving into the fog. The most disturbing phenomena, however, involves the feeling of being actively pushed. Pedestrians have been struck by an unseen, forceful blow, staggering toward the drop. Others report a faint, despairing whisper right beside their ear, always urging them toward the water below. The bridge remains a vital artery for the region, but its foundation rests on more than concrete and steel. Every night, as the last lights vanish from Windsor and the river grows dark, Agnes waits. She is the ghost in the static, the perpetual chill, forever bound to the bridge, searching for company in the black, swallowing depths of the Hawkesbury. Three, Malden Suspension Bridge, Victoria. The fog rising from the Loddon River always clings heaviest around the Malden Suspension Bridge, a wrought iron anachronism near its namesake Victorian Gold Town. At night, when the river mouth is choked with mist and the air is thick with the scent of wet eucalyptus, the bridge ceases to be merely a crossing. It becomes a throat of cold, echoing space. Locals say the residual chill isn't the river air, but the despair of those who met their ends below its sturdy, yet treacherous, span. The worst of these tragedies occurred in the late 1890s, involving a young couple, Elias and Clara. Elias, a prospector returning from a failed claim, was accused of theft rather than face the shame and inevitable penal sentence. The pair chose a pact. They walked halfway across the bridge, their silhouettes dissolving in the lantern light, before lashing themselves together with the chain from Elias's mining lamp and stepping over the low railing into the black water. Their bodies were recovered miles downstream, but their final desperate minutes are said to remain embedded in the bridge's iron structure. The specific hauntings rarely manifest as full apparitions, preferring instead subtle, deeply unnerving sensory attacks. Crossing the Malden Bridge after midnight, visitors frequently report a sudden, profound drop in temperature, regardless of the season. More disturbingly, several drivers have pulled over, convinced they heard the faint, metallic scrape of a chain dragging along the road surface directly beneath their car, followed by a double splash sound from the unseen river below. The most consistent report is the sensation of a cold, clinging weight pressing against their chest as they reach the midway point, the exact spot where Elias and Clara made their final, binding embrace. Those unfortunate enough to look down into the fog when the moon is right sometimes catch the fleeting impression of two pale, upturned faces bobbing momentarily in the eddying current before the mist swallows them whole. The bridge creaks and sways perpetually, but on certain nights, the rhythmic groans of the stressed metal are subtly overlaid with an almost inaudible, desperate sigh, a chilling testament to the lovers who decided that eternity, tethered and dark, was preferable to life apart. Four, Prince's Bridge, Melbourne, Victoria. The air under the central arches of Prince's Bridge always carries the severe, mineral chill of the Yarra, a dampness that seems older than the 1888 bluestone from which the structure is built. Even amidst the clamor of Melbourne's bustling center, shadows cling to the granite piers where the river rushes seaward, maintaining a cold reserve. Tourists cross unaware, but those who linger near the ornate ironwork sometimes sense a residual sorrow seeping from the stone itself. This confluence of Federation Square and the Arts Precinct is one of Melbourne's historical anchors. Yet the swift, dark water flowing beneath it remains an archive of the city's deepest despair. The location has always been a crossing point, and for centuries, the unpredictable Yarra has claimed lives victims of accident, neglect, and deliberate action. Historical records from the deep Victorian era detail numerous tragic recoveries beneath the bridge's predecessor. Failed prospectors, dock laborers, and, most frequently, desperate individuals seeking final escape from the harsh reality of late 19th century Melbourne. It is these forgotten deep-water victims, never fully named or mourned, whose spiritual residue is believed to haunt the bridge's very foundations. The most frequently reported phenomenon is not a visual apparition, but an unseen entity known to locals as the current. Your witnesses, often lone street cleaners or graveyard shift tram operators, report a sudden, profound weight pressing down upon them when they stand near the central span between 2:00 a.m. and 4:00 a.m. This pressure is accompanied by the chilling sound of heavy, waterlogged fabric brushing past, a sound heard just above the river's natural murmur. Those who stare into the dark rush below sometimes glimpse a fleeting, gray reflection in the churning current, a face that belongs to no living person, eyes wide open and staring upward from the depths. The chilling conclusion of this haunting is the immediate, irrational compulsion to lean further over the railing, a magnetic pull toward the cold oblivion, as if the river itself is calling its submerged children home. Five, Alexandra Suspension Bridge, Tasmania. The Alexandra Suspension Bridge, spanning the perilous Russell Falls Gorge in Tasmania's temperate rainforest, is a structure perpetually draped in shadow and mist. Built in the late 19th century to access remote logging reserves, its initial purpose was purely utilitarian, yet its isolation quickly bred unsettling folklore. The steel cables and timber deck, now slick with lichen, vibrate faintly even when the wind is still, a tremor locals attribute to the tragedy of its construction. Historical records confirm the death of a young foreman named Elias Vance in 1898. He fell when a supporting scaffold gave way, plunging over 200 feet into the churning river below. His body was never recovered from the deep, swift current. The manifestations reported at the bridge are precise and almost exclusively occur after dusk. Hikers and park rangers traversing the crossing consistently report a sudden, profound drop in ambient temperature near the bridge's midpoint, regardless of the season, creating localized columns of icy air. More disturbing are the auditory phenomena. Witnesses frequently describe the sound of heavy, panicked breathing directly behind them, often accompanied by the sharp, splintering crack of stressed wood, despite the surrounding forest being perfectly silent. Crucially, photographs taken on the bridge often display inexplicable blurred areas or strange, stretched shadows in the background. Anomalies that specialized digital analysis fails to dismiss as mere light artifacts or camera shake. The most frightening encounters involve direct, tactile interaction with what is assumed to be the restless presence of Elias Vance. People stopped on the deck at night have reported a cold, insistent pressure against their lower backs, as if a desperate hand were attempting to shove them over the timber railing and into the abyss. One park volunteer, filing an anonymous incident report in 2017, described hearing a faint, wet whisper just below the level of the deck, seemingly emanating from the void beneath the planks. The voice allegedly pleaded for help, its tone choked with water and desperation, before sharply commanding the witness to join me. The Alexandra Bridge remains a vital, yet deeply unnerving crossing, a structure where the grip of the living is tenuous, and the history of a fatal fall seems determined to repeat itself. Six, Hawkesbury River Railway Bridge, New South Wales. The Hawkesbury River Railway Bridge spans a vast, dark void of tidal water, an imposing lattice of cold steel connecting Sydney to the north. Even modern locomotives seem hushed, crossing its massive 860-meter length, a silence that amplifies the profound chill rising off the deep waterway. Rail staff know the bridge is not merely a functional structure, but a silent monument to forgotten suffering, a place where the air pressure itself seems unnaturally heavy, echoing the deadly conditions of its birth. Construction in the late 1880s was an engineering marvel built upon staggering human sacrifice. To sink the enormous caissons deep into the unstable riverbed, workers toiled under extreme compressed air to hold back the water, leading to rapid, agonizing death from decompression sickness. The bends. Historical records and anecdotal accounts suggest that, due to the intense pressure and the desperate need to maintain construction schedules, several men who perished deep within the iron chambers were never recovered. They were simply sealed within the concrete foundations, their bodies serving as macabre ballast for the massive piers that hold the rail line aloft. The resulting spiritual echoes are localized and profoundly disturbing. Engineers performing late-night inspections report intense, localized cold spots centered directly above Piers 3 and 4, even during oppressive Australian heat. But the most terrifying manifestation is auditory, a rhythmic, muffled sound, like a hammer striking iron deep underwater. It is the sound of desperate communication, trapped laborers knocking against the internal walls of the caissons, miles beneath the rail deck, signaling their inescapable, watery interment. Those who cross the Hawkesbury after midnight sometimes catch pale, indistinct shapes clinging to the underside of the girders, figures that resemble men doubled over in debilitating pain. The bridge is forever haunted by the suffocating pressure of its own creation, a monumental structure where the dead are not interred beneath soil, but entombed within the very foundations that ensure the trains keep running on time. Seven. Ross Bridge, Ross, Tasmania. The sandstone of the Ross Bridge, completed in 1836, retains a profound glacial coldness even under the fierce Tasmanian sun. It is a masterpiece of colonial engineering, yet the air around it possesses an inescapable density. Tourists flock to admire the bridge's signature feature: 186 intricately carved faces adorning the arches, depicting everything from deities to grotesque colonial figures. But the true horror lies not in the artistry, but in the oppressive silence that falls when the light begins to fail, suggesting the faces are more than mere decoration, perhaps acting as silent witnesses to persistent anguish. The construction employed the harshest labor gangs, men driven by the lash to chisel these detailed reliefs under impossible conditions. Local legend suggests that the soul of one particularly cruel overseer, known for tormenting his convict workforce, refused to leave the structure he had built on a foundation of suffering and exhaustion. They say this man, either an architect or a military superintendent, was driven mad by the sheer impossibility of the detail requested, eventually dying near the central arch. This demanding, oppressive entity now walks the low parapets and the banks below, eternally surveying his tormented, long-dead workforce. Visitors report radical temperature shifts localized directly over the stone parapets, often accompanied by the distinct, sickening scent of unwashed wool and decay. At midnight, when the River Macquarie flows black beneath the arches, the rhythmic clink and drag of unseen chains can sometimes be heard echoing from the piers, sounds that abruptly cease if a witness attempts to pinpoint the source. Most unnervingly, those who linger too long have claimed to see subtle, momentary changes in the expressions of the carved faces, a flicker of agony, a widened eye, or a sneer of pure, malevolent superiority directed straight at the observer. The Ross Bridge remains a testament to human endurance, but it also functions as a permanent, open-air prison for the dead. Every detail, every grotesque visage, is a silent, artistic record of historical agony, forever trapped beneath the heavy weight of the colonial past. The suffering spirits are eternally watched by an invisible warden, anchored to the stone, ensuring that none of the tormented ever find true release. Eight. The Rip Bridge, Central Coast, New South Wales. The sea mist that rolls in off Brisbane water often seems heavier around the Rip Bridge, a crossing notorious for its treacherous currents and unnerving silences after dark. It's not just the deep, cold water passing beneath the imposing concrete pylons that unsettled locals. It's the understanding that the bridge holds the memory of every life the Rip has claimed, a vortex of unresolved despair beneath the surface. The most persistent legend concerns the original construction in the late 1940s. While official records cite accidents, the whispers insist on something darker. A young engineer, driven to madness by the sheer difficulty of mastering the unpredictable seabed, either fell or was pushed during a midnight inspection. They say his body was never fully recovered, swallowed by the tidal race and buried in the silt that now supports the central span. Ever since, those working on maintenance or fishing near the pylons have reported sudden, sharp drops in temperature and the distinct, metallic smell of brine and old iron, even miles from the water's edge. The specific hauntings are subtle but deeply disturbing. Drivers crossing late, especially around the second pylon heading toward Woi Woi, report brief, peripheral glimpses of a figure standing impossibly close to the edge of the narrow walkway. A tall silhouette in an outdated wool overcoat. More chillingly, electronic disturbances are rampant. Car radios inexplicably tuned to static that holds a faint, high-pitched ringing sound, and dashboard cameras routinely fail when pointed toward the water below the central arches. It's believed the engineer remains trapped between the sky and the rip, forever supervising the structure that broke him. Last week, 2 teenagers filming a night lapse over the bridge captured an anomaly. In the final footage, a brief green flash illuminates the steel guardrail, and for exactly 2 frames, a single elongated handprint, slick with what appears to be dark water, is pressed against the dry concrete barrier, vanishing instantly in the next exposure. The constant sucking roar of the rip echoes upward, seeming less like natural current and more like a sigh of perpetual imprisonment. 9. Albury Railway Bridge, Albury, New South Wales. The Albury Railway Bridge is not merely a crossing. It is a monument of cold, vibrating steel spanning the dark, swift run of the Murray River. Even in high summer, a profound mineral chill clings to the central pylons, a dampness that feels unnatural, independent of the water flowing 70 feet below. The structure carries the weight of modern freight and passenger rail, but railway staff and local witnesses claim it also carries the echo of events long past, moments violently impressed upon the structure itself during its difficult construction. Local historians and rail staff often reference the unrecorded deaths that occurred during the massive construction efforts of the 1880s. While official ledgers list few casualties, the unofficial history speaks of men lost to the powerful current or crushed beneath the sheer weight of the iron piers. The most pervasive legend centers on a young, unnamed laborer, reportedly trapped and sealed beneath the concrete foundation of the northernmost abutment when a crane collapsed without warning during a vital pour. It is believed his spirit remains anchored to the junction of steel and stone, a forgotten soul denied passage downstream. The resulting haunting is primarily auditory and thermal. Maintenance crews performing inspection runs between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. consistently report sudden, debilitating cold spots that register 10 degrees lower than the ambient temperature, localized precisely around the base of the northern truss. More disturbing is the acoustic manifestation, the distinct, wet sound of heavy breathing, sometimes accompanied by a muffled, agonizing metallic screech that seems to resonate from within the structure's core. Experienced drivers have applied the emergency brakes, convinced they have struck an unseen obstruction, only to find the track clear and the signal lights burning green. The most terrifying encounters involve the brief, fleeting apparition seen by those standing on the riverbank just before sunrise. A dark, mud-caked figure standing stiffly between the rails, silhouetted against the nascent light. It never moves towards the observer, only stares east across the Murray. As soon as the sun clears the horizon, the figure vanishes entirely, leaving behind only the cold promise of the next train and the endless, indifferent rush of the water beneath the unforgiving steel. 10. Swanport Bridge, South Australia. The Swanport Bridge, spanning the Murray River near Murray Bridge, is less known for its engineering and more for the deep, silent cold that clings to its concrete pilings. When the river mist rises thick and white, obscuring the pylons, local drivers report an involuntary physical tightening in their chests as they cross the desolate, elevated expanse, especially after midnight. This pervasive sense of dread is tied directly to the bridge's history, an unsettling echo that refuses to dissipate over the decades. The legend surrounding the structure speaks of a fatal incident during its intense construction in the early 1970s. A steel rigger, reportedly a young man named Robert, slipped from the high framework. He fell not into the cushioning river water below, but onto a partially completed support structure, leaving him trapped, grievously injured, and dying slowly over several hours before rescue crews could safely reach the precarious location. It is this traumatic, isolated death, suspended between the water and the road deck, that is said to be the genesis of the bridge's phenomena. The most frequently reported occurrence involves vehicle drivers encountering an anomalous figure near the third southern pylon. Commuters and long-haul truck drivers report seeing a man in old-style high-vis clothing, standing motionless on the narrow emergency walkway, facing the oncoming traffic. As the vehicle approaches the spot, the figure does not move or acknowledge the sound, often resulting in a panicked swerve, only for the ghostly image to vanish completely from the rear-view mirror. Worse are the specific documented complaints of phantom scraping or dragging sounds heard from beneath the deck. Heavy, resonating noises that seem to travel up through the vehicle's tires, accompanied by a sudden, inexplicable drop in internal temperature. Authorities typically dismiss these recurrent reports as nothing more than driver fatigue or optical illusions caused by the lighting grid and fog. Yet, the Swanport Bridge maintains its notorious reputation. If you ever find yourself halted on the deck late at night, many locals advise against looking down toward the shadows of the massive pilings, sometimes carried up on the cold river wind. The faint, desperate whisper of a trapped man asking for help is allegedly carried up through the steel grates. Hampton Bridge, Kangaroo Valley, NSW. The Hampton Bridge, inaugurated in 1898, is less a thoroughfare and more a sentinel guarding the entrance to Kangaroo Valley. Its latticework and iron pylons hang suspended over the Shoalhaven River, often swallowed by cold river mist that drifts up through the sandstone gorge. This isolation lends a palpable weight to the structure, especially at night when the bush sounds cease, replaced only by the groan of the old timber decking. For over a century, local lore has maintained that the bridge is permanently occupied by a presence unwilling to leave the site of its tragic end. Long after the rest of the world has moved on, the most persistent account centers on a man known only as the engineer, sometimes identified as an aging worker named Gus, who suffered a catastrophic fall from the scaffolding during the bridge's final stages of construction. Official records are frustratingly scant regarding accidental deaths at the time, lending the tale an air of frustrating authenticity. Those who regularly cross after midnight claim to see him. He manifests as a dark, indistinct silhouette standing at the center point of the decking, often leaning against the suspension cables, his figure briefly visible in the peripheral flare of headlights, before dissolving back into the structural shadows. The hauntings are rarely passive. Drivers have reported their vehicle's engines inexplicably stalling exactly over the deepest part of the river. When forced to wait, the faint but distinct sound of heavy, rhythmic hammering can be heard echoing from the ironwork below, sometimes accompanied by the dragging sound of chains on rock. If the occupants turn back toward the valley entrance, they may glimpse the figure moving, not walking, but swaying unnaturally, as if perpetually suspended just above the waterline. This sighting is invariably followed by a rapid, icy drop in temperature inside the car cabin. Surviving the crossing simply means accelerating past the point of intrusion before the cold grips the vehicle completely. The ghost of Hampton Bridge is not seeking help. It seems merely to assert its ownership over the century-old structure it helped forge. Its chilling vigilance ensures that the aged sentinel remains eternally haunted, a perpetual monument to a forgotten death that continues to halt traffic on silent, misty nights. Sure. Lennox Bridge, Blue Mountains, New South Wales. The air around Lapstone Creek is permanently chilled, dense with the scent of wet eucalyptus and aged sandstone, even in daylight. The shadow cast by Lennox Bridge, a monumental arch spanning the gorge, feels unnaturally heavy. This structure, a testament to early colonial engineering, holds a silence that is more oppressive than peaceful. The echo of forced labor locked deep within the valley floor. The cold humidity clings to the stone, and those who approach the 1833 structure often report an immediate and profound drop in ambient temperature. Regardless of the season, commissioned in the 1830s and meticulously crafted by the convict gangs, managed by David Lennox, the bridge stands as Australia's oldest surviving stone arch. The construction was notoriously brutal and rushed. Local lore insists that not all those who laid the stone went home. The persistent legend is that an unnamed convict laborer, weakened by illness and accused of minor theft, met his end not by official execution, but by being deliberately entombed within the structure itself, his body pressed into the mortar of the central abutment as a macabre foundation. The bridge is not merely old, it is profoundly restless. Visitors and historical researchers often report hearing the faint, rhythmic sound of heavy boots scraping against the damp rock, sounds that abruptly cease the moment focused attention is paid to them. On windless nights, the spectral manifestation is sometimes observed, a hunched, malnourished figure in rough wool, seen momentarily leaning over the low parapet, looking down towards the rushing water before dissolving into the gray mist rising from the creek. These appearances are invariably accompanied by an overwhelming feeling of intense, suffocating despair that blankets the entire span of the stonework. Forensic experts dismiss the reports of residual magnetic fields and localized infrasound. Yet, they cannot explain the chilling phenomenon of residual sound captured by sensitive microphones placed under the arch. A low, rhythmic groan, sometimes punctuated by a muffled, agonizing cry. Lennox Bridge remains a solemn monument to progress, built on the suffering it refuses to forget, a cold, heavy burden that the relentless push of time has failed to smooth away. Shersan, Story Bridge, Brisbane, Queensland. The air above the Brisbane River always carries a damp, metallic chill, especially when the city lights reflect off the water like scattered jewels. However, as midnight approaches the Story Bridge, the chill deepens, sinking past the skin and into the bone marrow. This massive steel cantilever, built during the depths of the Great Depression, required immense human effort and, rumor has it, exacted a terrible, unofficial toll. While official records cite only a few casualties, the sheer scale of the project, often undertaken in precarious conditions, high above the turbulent water, fostered a silent, unspoken dread among the workers. Local folklore, whispered among the families who watched the bridge ascend skywards in the 1930s, suggests that certain unforgiving sections of the structure still hold the restless spirits of men whose lives were crushed, then cemented over beneath the industrial behemoth. The most notorious stretch is the southern pylon base, where security guards and late-night engineers have reported inexplicable electrical surges and the acute, overpowering smell of stale sweat and wet concrete. Even on clear nights, it is not just the smells, though, that terrify those who work the night shift. The hauntings are specific, unnervingly focused on movement. Witnesses consistently describe a fleeting, shadowed figure always appearing just at the edge of peripheral vision, moving with the hurried, desperate pace of a man trying to reach safety. This apparition is often accompanied by the faint, rhythmic scraping sound of heavy boots on steel grating, followed instantly by a sound that is chillingly specific. The muffled, sickening thud of something substantial impacting water far below. The sound is never heard by more than one person at a time, and it leaves an indelible echo in the listener's mind. Occasionally, tourists attempting to capture the bridge's nighttime majesty report technical failures. Their cameras fail, batteries drain instantaneously, and recordings are overwritten with nothing but static. But sometimes, in the surviving photos, a vague, translucent outline like a smudge of soot and fear can be seen leaning against the southern girders, staring down into the blackness where the river flows eternally, waiting for the bridge to finally yield up the secret sealed within its cold, riveted iron heart. Yes, sir. Hornibrook Bridge, Brisbane, Queensland. The air above Bramble Bay always carries a foundational chill, even under the fierce Queensland sun. But at night, when the tidal flats breathe out a thick, gray humidity, the remaining pylons of the original Hornibrook Highway seem less like infrastructure and more like skeletal fingers grasping at the dark. This bridge, opened in 1935, once served as the crucial crossing connecting the peninsula, yet it also connected the living world to something far colder, something that sank deep into the seabed muck beneath the murky waters. It took immense effort and human sacrifice to stretch that 8-foot wide timber track across the bay. Though official records are sparse regarding construction fatalities, the legends persist, detailing the tragedy inherent in deep water construction. They speak of workers dragged under by sudden currents, or those who fell from the deck and vanished into the turbulent depths without a sound. The entrenched belief holds that these men, unrecovered and sealed into the very concrete caissons that support the bridge, never left their post. They are intrinsically tethered to the endless, mournful echo of the timbers creak and the sound of the relentless tide. The spectral activity concentrates on these surviving sections now utilized as pedestrian paths. Motorists who use the modern crossing often report glancing down to see a solitary figure standing motionless near the railing, sometimes wearing outdated, heavy work boots, only for the apparition to dissolve instantly into the sea mist. More profoundly unsettling are the accounts of lone cyclists or late-night anglers who experience a sudden, overwhelming pressure against their backs, a distinct, cold sensation of being urgently shoved towards the railing. This is frequently followed by the sound of a distant, waterlogged cough, a noise that seems to emanate from the structural timbers themselves, confirming that the bridge demands vigilance, or perhaps another tribute. The concrete age attempted to erase the Hornibrook's grim history, replacing the rattling old track with smooth, wide lanes. Yet, the deep foundations remain, immovable anchors holding the tormented spirits fast. When the tide is low and the bay is still, some residents claim the water whispers the names of the lost, forever trapped beneath the massive structure they bled to build, perpetually waiting for the road to claim another victim. Iron Cove Bridge, Drummoyne Roselle, New South Wales. The mist that clings to Iron Cove Bridge rarely dissipates fully, a low, damp shroud perpetually kissing the asphalt that links Drummoyne to Roselle. It is a structure of cold, gray steel and silent arches, but locals whisper it is also a monument built upon desperation. The original crossing, dating back to 1880, saw more than its share of nocturnal despair, and while the current, broader span was intended to erase the memory of those earlier tragedies, the darkness beneath the pylons remains heavy and unforgiving. The most persistent legend concerns the Leap of 1934. Though similar incidents are cataloged across the decades, witnesses, usually insomniacs, walking the Bay Run or fishermen working the early tide report, seeing a woman in antiquated clothes, standing precisely at the apex of the eastern arch. She is never clearly defined, appearing as an indistinct shimmer, a figure composed of static and moonlight. She doesn't scream, nor does she appear distressed in the conventional sense. Instead, she is merely waiting. Her presence is always accompanied by a profound drop in temperature and a crushing sense of temporal disorientation. Drivers crossing late at night sometimes report brief, catastrophic moments of vertigo, the sensation that the car is momentarily sinking, pulling violently toward the cold, oily blackness of the water below. One former bridge worker claimed the railings sometimes vibrate at a frequency too low to hear, a silent thrumming like the residual energy of a final, violent decision. The haunting is less a specific ghost and more an emotional residue, a heavy layer of finality pressed into the very concrete. If you stop your car near the midpoint on a truly foggy night, turn off the engine and listen closely. You might hear it, not the rush of the traffic, but a sound like a single, deep sigh carried on the damp air, marking the spot where the land ends and the endless, chilling water takes over. That brings us to the end of our countdown of Australia's top 15 haunted bridges. We hope you enjoyed delving into the eerie legends and ghostly sightings at these notorious crossings. If you know of a bridge we missed, drop the story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the macabre. Thanks for watching, and good night.